All right, this is about a number that should alarm every single person watching this video right now. 1 in 4 retirees in the United States is running short on savings. That's 25% of people who spent decades working, planning, and trusting the system to protect them in their final years. And they're now facing a financial reality that is fundamentally different from what they were promised. This is not speculation. This is not a trend piece designed to generate clicks. This is data from the Employee Benefit Research Institute's 2025 Retirement Confidence Survey, cross-referenced with Federal Reserve household balance sheet data and Social Security Administration projections. And what that data reveals is a structural breakdown in the retirement system that has been building for 30 years and is now reaching a critical inflection point. Over the next several minutes, I'm going to walk you through exactly why this is happening, why the traditional retirement planning framework no longer works in the current economic environment, and most importantly, what you need to understand right now if you're within 15 years of retirement or already retired. This is not about fear. This is about understanding the actual mechanics of how retirement savings are being eroded through a combination of inflation, sequence of returns risk, healthcare cost escalation, and policy changes that have quietly shifted risk from institutions onto individual households. By the end of this breakdown, you will have a clear framework for evaluating your own retirement position and understanding where the vulnerabilities are in the system. So turn off distractions and let's walk through this step by step. Before we examine the current crisis, you need to understand the foundational framework that governs retirement sustainability. It's called the safe withdrawal rate, and for decades it has been the cornerstone of retirement planning in the United States. The concept is simple. In 1994, a financial planner named William Bengen published research showing that retirees could withdraw 4% of their initial retirement portfolio balance annually, adjusted for inflation each year, and have a high probability of not running out of money over a 30-year retirement. This became known as the 4% rule, and it was built on historical stock and bond return data from 1926 through the early 1990s. The assumption was that a balanced portfolio of 60% stocks and 40% bonds would generate enough returns to support that withdrawal rate even through market downturns. But here's what's critical. That research was conducted during a period when bond yields were significantly higher than they are today, when healthcare costs were a smaller percentage of household budgets, when Social Security replacement rates were more generous, and when life expectancy was shorter. Every single one of those variables has shifted in a direction that makes the 4% rule less reliable, and most retirees and pre-retirees have no idea that the foundation they're building their plans on has fundamentally changed. The core issue is not just that people aren't saving enough, though that's certainly part of the problem. The deeper issue is that the cost structure of retirement has increased, while the income-generating capacity of traditional retirement portfolios has decreased. Let me explain what that means in concrete terms. In 1995, a retiree could purchase a 10-year Treasury bond yielding 6.5%. That means $1 million in bonds generated $65,000 per year in interest income with zero principal risk. Today, that same 10-year Treasury yields approximately 4.2%. So $1 million generates $42,000 in annual income, a 35% reduction in income from the safest asset class available. At the same time, inflation-adjusted healthcare costs for a 65-year-old couple retiring today are projected by Fidelity to exceed $315,000 over the course of retirement. That number does not include long-term care, which can easily add another $200,000 to $400,000, depending on geography and level of care needed. Housing costs, even for retirees who own their homes outright, continue to rise through property taxes, insurance, and maintenance. And the purchasing power of Social Security benefits, while technically adjusted for inflation through COLA increases, does not keep pace with the actual inflation experienced by retirees, because the CPI calculation systematically understates healthcare and housing cost increases. Now let's talk about what's happening in 2026 specifically, because the convergence of these factors is creating acute stress right now. The Federal Reserve raised interest rates aggressively between 2022 and 2024 to combat inflation. That caused bond prices to fall sharply, which means retirees holding long-duration bonds in their portfolios saw significant principal losses. At the same time, the stock market experienced heightened volatility, and anyone who retired between 2022 and 2024 is now facing what's called sequence of returns risk. This is the risk that poor investment returns in the early years of retirement permanently impair your ability to sustain withdrawals, even if returns improve later. If you retire with $1 million and the market drops 20% in year one, you now have $800,000. If you withdraw $40,000 for living expenses, you're down to $760,000. Even if the market recovers fully in year 2, you're starting from a lower base, and the math never fully recovers. This is why the timing of retirement relative to market cycles matters enormously, and it's why so many recent retirees are discovering that their savings are not lasting as long as projected. The data on retirement preparedness is stark, and it's important to understand these numbers in context. According to the Employee Benefit Research Institute, 27% of workers and retirees report they or their spouse have virtually no savings or investments set aside for retirement. That's not 1 in 4 running short. That's 1 in 4 starting from zero. But even among those who have saved, the median retirement account balance for households aged 55 to 64 is approximately $185,000. That sounds like a meaningful number until you run it through a withdrawal calculation. Using the traditional 4% rule, that generates $7,400 per year in income. The average Social Security benefit for a retired worker in 2026 is approximately $1,220 per month, or $23,040 annually. Combined, that's $30,240 in annual retirement income. The median household income for working Americans is roughly $75,000. So even with Social Security, a household with median retirement savings is looking at a 60% reduction in income at retirement. That gap has to be filled somehow. And for many retirees, it's being filled by working part-time, drawing down savings faster than planned, or reducing their standard of living significantly. Let's examine the mechanics of how this shortfall is actually playing out in household finances, because the aggregate data only tells part of the story. The Federal Reserve's Survey of Consumer Finances tracks household balance sheets, and when you break down the data by age cohort, you see a clear pattern. Households aged 65 to 74 have a median net worth of approximately $410,000. That sounds substantial, but roughly 60% of that is tied up in home equity, which is illiquid and cannot be easily converted to income without selling the home or taking on a reverse mortgage, both of which come with significant costs and limitations. The liquid financial assets, the retirement accounts, brokerage accounts, and savings have a median value closer to $164,000 for this age group, and remember, that's the median, which means half of households have less than that. For households aged 75 and older, the median liquid financial assets drop to approximately $83,000, indicating that savings are being drawn down over time, often faster than anticipated. Now let's talk about the 3 primary drivers that are accelerating this drawdown and creating the 1 in 4 shortfall we're seeing in the data. The first driver is healthcare cost inflation, which has consistently outpaced general inflation for the last 3 decades. Medicare, which most Americans become eligible for at age 65, covers a significant portion of healthcare expenses, but it does not cover everything. Medicare Part B, which covers doctor visits and outpatient services, has a standard premium of $185 per month in 2026 for most beneficiaries, but higher income retirees pay more through income-related monthly adjustment amounts, or IRMAA, which can push premiums to $628 per month for individuals with modified adjusted gross income above $500,000. Medicare Part D, which covers prescription drugs, has an average premium of approximately $50 per month, but actual costs vary widely based on the plan and drugs needed. And traditional Medicare does not include an out-of-pocket maximum, which means catastrophic expenses are possible without supplemental coverage. Most retirees purchase either a Medigap policy or a Medicare Advantage plan to fill these gaps, and those policies add another $150 to $400 per month depending on coverage level and geography. When you add it all together, a couple paying for Medicare. Part B, Part D, and supplemental coverage is spending between $8,000 and $12,000 annually just on insurance premiums before any actual healthcare services are consumed. Then layer on copays, deductibles, and out-of-pocket costs for services not covered by Medicare, such as dental, vision, and hearing, and the annual healthcare spend for a healthy couple easily exceeds $15,000. For couples with chronic conditions or significant medication needs, that number can double. The Fidelity Retiree Healthcare Cost Estimate, which is the most widely cited projection, puts lifetime healthcare costs at $315,000 for a 65-year-old couple retiring in 2025. But that number assumes Medicare remains unchanged, which is increasingly uncertain given the Medicare Part A trust fund is projected to be depleted by 2031, according to the Congressional Budget Office. If Medicare benefits are reduced or eligibility ages are increased, retirees will bear a larger share of costs, and the $315,000 projection will be conservative. The second driver is inflation, not the headline CPI number you see reported in the news, but the actual inflation experienced by retirees in their consumption basket. The Bureau of Labor Statistics publishes an experimental price index called the CPIE, which measures inflation for households where the reference person is 62 years or older. This index consistently shows higher inflation than the standard CPI because retirees spend a larger share of their budgets on categories that inflate faster, specifically healthcare, housing services, and utilities. Between 2000 and 2023, the CPIE increased at an average annual rate of 2.4%, compared to 2.1% for the standard CPI. That gap may seem small, but over a 25-year retirement, it compounds significantly. If you retire with $1 million and assume 2.1% inflation in your planning, but actual inflation is 2.4%, your purchasing power erodes 7.5% faster than expected over 25 years. That difference can easily be the margin between running out of money at age 87 versus age 92. The inflation spike between 2021 and 2023, where headline CPI reached 9.1% in June 2022, was particularly devastating for retirees because Social Security COLA adjustments lag actual inflation by months, and investment portfolios suffered simultaneous losses in both stocks and bonds, eliminating the traditional diversification benefit. A retiree who began 2022 with a balanced portfolio and withdrew 4% for living expenses saw their portfolio decline by approximately 16% that year when accounting for both market losses and withdrawals. Even with the market recovery in 2023 and 2024, the sequence of returns damage was done, and many retirees were forced to reduce spending or return to part-time work to avoid depleting their savings prematurely. The third driver is the structural shift in retirement income sources over the last 30 years, specifically the decline of defined benefit pension plans and the corresponding rise of defined contribution plans like 401ks. In 1980, 38% of private sector workers were covered by a defined benefit pension plan that provided guaranteed lifetime income. By 2023, that number had fallen to less than 12%. The shift to 401k plans transferred investment risk, longevity risk, and sequence of returns risk from employers onto individual workers, and the data shows clearly that most workers are not equipped to manage that risk effectively. The median 401k balance for workers aged 55 to 64 is approximately $71,000, which is nowhere near sufficient to fund even a modest retirement. Even among workers who have participated in a 401k plan for 30 years or more, the median balance is only $280,000, which would generate about $11,000 annually using a 4% withdrawal rate. Social Security was never designed to be the primary source of retirement income. It was designed to replace approximately 40% of pre-retirement earnings for median income workers. But for the 1 in 4 retirees running short on savings, Social Security is often providing 70% to 80% of their total income, and that creates extreme financial fragility. Any unexpected expense, a major home repair, a health emergency, a family obligation, can push these households into debt or force them to liquidate retirement savings at inopportune times. And the long-term solvency of Social Security itself is uncertain. The Social Security Board of Trustees projects that the Old Age and Survivors Insurance Trust Fund will be depleted by 2033, at which point incoming payroll tax revenue would only be sufficient to pay approximately 79% of scheduled benefits. If Congress does not act to address the funding shortfall, either through payroll tax increases, benefit cuts, or a combination of both, retirees will face an automatic 21% reduction in benefits starting in 2033. For someone currently receiving $2,000 per month, that would be a $420 monthly cut, or over $5,000 annually. Now let's talk about the mechanisms that are being used to manage this crisis at the policy level, because understanding the policy response helps you anticipate what's coming and position accordingly. The first mechanism is what's called the retirement age increase. Full retirement age for Social Security, which is the age at which you can claim unreduced benefits, has already been increased from 65 for people born before 1938 to 67 for anyone born in 1960 or later. But there are ongoing discussions in policy circles about increasing it further to 68, 69, or even 70 to extend the solvency of the trust fund. Every year that full retirement age is increased effectively reduces the lifetime benefits a worker receives because most people cannot or will not work additional years, and instead claim benefits early at reduced rates. This is a quiet benefit cut that doesn't require legislation explicitly reducing benefit amounts, and it disproportionately affects lower-income workers who have shorter life expectancies and less ability to delay claiming. The second mechanism is means testing, which is the process of reducing benefits for higher-income retirees. Medicare already uses means testing through IRMA surcharges, where higher-income beneficiaries pay more for Part B and Part D coverage. There are proposals to expand means testing to Social Security benefits, either by reducing COLAs for high earners or by making a larger portion of benefits taxable. The stated goal is to preserve benefits for lower-income retirees who depend on them most, but the practical effect is that workers who saved diligently and accumulated retirement assets are penalized relative to those who did not. This creates a perverse incentive structure where saving more can result in lower net retirement income after accounting for reduced benefits and higher taxes. The third mechanism, and this is the one that's most relevant to the 1 in 4 retiree shortfall, is the shift toward encouraging later retirement and phased retirement. The narrative from policymakers and financial planners is increasingly that retirement at 65 is outdated, that people are living longer and healthier lives, and that working until 70 or beyond is both financially prudent and socially beneficial. While there is truth to the longevity argument, the data shows that not everyone has the physical capacity or labor market opportunities to work into their late 60s and 70s. Manual laborers, workers in physically demanding jobs, and those with chronic health conditions often cannot continue working. And the labor market for older workers is less favorable than the narrative suggests. Age discrimination is pervasive, even if illegal, and older workers who lose their jobs face longer unemployment durations and are more likely to experience wage cuts when they are rehired. Let's examine what this means for someone currently in their 50s or early 60s who is trying to assess their own retirement readiness. The traditional retirement planning calculation goes like this. You estimate your annual retirement expenses, subtract your expected Social Security benefits, and then calculate how much portfolio income you need to cover the gap. If you need $60,000 per year in retirement and Social Security provides $30,000, you need $30,000 from your portfolio. Using the 4% rule, that requires a portfolio of $750,000. But that calculation assumes constant expenses, constant returns, and no major shocks. In reality, expenses are not constant. They tend to be higher in the early years of retirement, when retirees are more active, and then decline in the middle years before spiking again in late retirement due to healthcare and long-term care costs. This is called the retirement spending smile, and it means you need more liquidity and flexibility than a simple 4% withdrawal calculation suggests. Returns are also not constant. Stocks and bonds move in cycles, and if you retire at the peak of a market cycle, your sequence of returns risk is maximized. The traditional advice to shift toward a more conservative asset allocation as you approach retirement, moving from 60% stocks to perhaps 40% stocks, reduces volatility but also reduces expected returns, which makes it harder to sustain withdrawals over a long retirement. And the assumption of no major shocks is simply unrealistic. Medical emergencies, family financial crises, housing disasters, these events happen with regularity, and they disproportionately affect retirees because retirees have less ability to increase income to absorb the shock. A working household can pick up overtime, take a second job, or defer discretionary spending temporarily. A retired household living on fixed income has no such flexibility. This is why financial planners are increasingly recommending a more dynamic approach to retirement planning that includes multiple contingency plans. One framework that's gaining traction is the guardrails approach, where instead of withdrawing a fixed percentage every year, you adjust withdrawals based on portfolio performance. If the market is up significantly, you can increase spending. If the market is down, you reduce spending temporarily to preserve capital. This requires discipline and flexibility, but it significantly increases the probability of not running out of money. Another approach is to think about retirement income in tiers. The first tier is guaranteed income, Social Security, and any pension benefits. This covers your baseline fixed expenses, housing, utilities, food, insurance. The second tier is portfolio withdrawals, which cover discretionary spending and can be adjusted based on market conditions and portfolio performance. The third tier is reserves for unexpected expenses, a cash cushion or home equity line of credit that you can tap in emergencies without having to liquidate investments at a loss. Now let's talk about the specific risks that are causing the 1 in 4 shortfall we're seeing in the data. The first risk is longevity risk, which is the risk of outliving your savings. Life expectancy at age 65 is currently 84.3 years for men and 86.7 years for women, according to Social Security Administration data. But those are averages, which means 50% of people will live longer than that. A 65-year-old couple has a 45% probability that at least one spouse will live to age 90, and a 20% probability that at least one will live to age 95. If you plan for a 20-year retirement and you live 25 or 30 years, your savings will be depleted, and you'll be entirely dependent on Social Security. The math is unforgiving. If you withdraw 4% annually from a portfolio, you're drawing down approximately 5% of the balance each year when you account for inflation adjustments. Over 25 years, that's a 125% total withdrawal, which means your portfolio has to generate at least 1.25 times its starting value in real returns just to stay solvent. That's achievable with a balanced portfolio in normal market conditions, but it's not achievable if you experience 2 or 3 major bear markets during that period. The second risk is healthcare shock, which is a large unexpected medical expense that depletes savings rapidly. Long-term care is the most common and most expensive healthcare shock. The median cost of a private room in a nursing home is approximately $108,000 per year, and the median stay is 2.5 years, which means a $270,000 expense that Medicare does not cover. Most people do not have long-term care insurance because the premiums are expensive and the policies are complex. And even those who do have coverage often find that the benefits are capped at levels that don't fully cover actual costs. If one spouse requires long-term care, it can financially devastate the household and leave the surviving spouse with insufficient assets to maintain their standard of living. The third risk is sequence of returns risk, which we've touched on already but bears repeating because it's so poorly understood. The order in which investment returns occur matters enormously in retirement. If you experience strong returns early in retirement, your portfolio grows and you build a cushion that can absorb later volatility. But if you experience poor returns or a major market decline in the first 5 years of retirement, your portfolio is permanently impaired. You're withdrawing from a declining balance which locks in losses, and even if the market recovers, you never fully catch up. This is why the period from 5 years before retirement to 5 years after retirement is sometimes called the retirement red zone. The sequence of returns risk is highest during this window, and it's critical to de-risk the portfolio appropriately. Let's talk about the asset allocation question specifically, because this is where many retirees and pre-retirees are getting conflicting advice. The traditional model is to shift toward a more conservative allocation as you age, moving from a growth-oriented portfolio of 80% stocks and 20% bonds in your 30s and 40s to a more balanced 60-40 portfolio in your 50s, and then to a conservative 40-60 or even 30-70 portfolio in retirement. The logic is that older investors have less time to recover from market downturns and therefore need to prioritize capital preservation over growth. But that logic was developed in an era of higher bond yields and shorter retirements. Today, with bond yields near historic lows and retirements lasting 25 to 30 years, a conservative portfolio may not generate sufficient returns to sustain withdrawals. You end up with a portfolio that doesn't crash in bear markets, but also doesn't grow enough to keep pace with inflation and spending. Some financial advisors are now recommending a more aggressive allocation in retirement, maintaining 60% or even 70% equity exposure to capture growth, but pairing that with a larger cash reserve to avoid having to sell stocks during downturns. The idea is that you keep 3 to 5 years of living expenses in cash or short-term bonds, and you only tap your equity portfolio when markets are favorable. This approach requires more active management and discipline, but it addresses both the growth problem and the sequence of returns risk. The challenge is that it requires a larger starting portfolio because you're holding significant assets in cash that earn minimal returns. Now let's address the question that's probably forming in your mind as you listen to this. What should you do if you're approaching retirement or already retired and you're realizing that your savings may not be sufficient? The first step is to run a detailed retirement projection using realistic assumptions. Don't rely on overly optimistic return assumptions or overly conservative spending estimates. Use actual data on your current expenses, adjust for known changes like paying off a mortgage or eliminating work-related costs, and build in inflation at 3% annually, not the 2% that many online calculators use. Factor in healthcare costs using the Fidelity estimate as a baseline, and add a cushion for unexpected expenses. If the projection shows you running out of money before age 90, you have a shortfall that needs to be addressed. The second step is to optimize your Social Security claiming strategy. The difference between claiming at 62 versus waiting until 70 can be as much as 76% in monthly benefits. For a single person with average earnings, that's the difference between roughly $1,400 per month at 62 and $2,264 per month at 70. Over a 25-year retirement, delaying from 62 to 70 results in approximately $180,000 more in cumulative benefits, even after accounting for the foregone benefits during the delay period. The math strongly favors delaying for most people, especially those with longer life expectancies or who are married and want to maximize survivor benefits. But delaying requires having other income sources or savings to live on during the delay period, which is why this strategy works best for those who continue working part-time or who have sufficient retirement savings to bridge the gap. The third step is to evaluate your housing situation. For many retirees, their home represents the largest single asset they own, but it's also illiquid and generates no income. If you're in a high-cost area and you're willing to relocate, downsizing or moving to a lower-cost state can free up significant capital and reduce ongoing expenses. Property taxes, insurance, and maintenance costs vary dramatically by location, and moving from a high-tax state like New Jersey or Illinois to a lower-tax state like Florida or Texas can save $10,000 or more annually. That's equivalent to an additional $250,000 in retirement savings using the 4% rule. If relocating is not an option, a reverse mortgage can convert home equity into income, but these products are complex and expensive, and they should only be used after carefully evaluating the costs and implications. The fourth step is to consider working longer or working part-time in retirement. Every additional year you work accomplishes three things simultaneously. It delays the start of withdrawals from your retirement savings, allowing the portfolio to continue growing. It allows you to delay claiming Social Security, increasing your eventual benefit, and it provides current income to cover living expenses. A single additional year of work at age 65, assuming you're earning $60,000 and saving 10%, adds $6,000 to your retirement savings, avoids a $40,000 withdrawal from your portfolio, and increases your Social Security benefit by approximately 8%. That combination can add 2 to 3 years of sustainability to your retirement. Working part-time in retirement, even just 15 or 20 hours per week earning $20,000 annually, can significantly reduce the withdrawal burden on your portfolio and extend its longevity. The final step is to be prepared to adjust your spending in retirement based on market conditions and portfolio performance. This is the guardrails approach I mentioned earlier, and it requires psychological flexibility. In years when the market is up 20%, you can increase your spending or take that vacation you've been delaying. In years when the market is down 15%, you cut back on discretionary expenses and tighten the budget. The goal is not to live in austerity, but to align your spending with your portfolio's capacity to support it. This dynamic approach significantly increases the probability of not running out of money, but it requires accepting that retirement spending will not be perfectly constant and predictable. Let me be very clear about what the 1 in 4 shortfall means in practical terms. It means that millions of Americans who worked their entire lives, who saved in 401k plans, who followed the conventional advice, are discovering that the system did not deliver what they were promised. It's not because they were reckless or irresponsible. It's because the economic environment changed in ways that made the traditional retirement planning framework obsolete. Bond yields collapsed, healthcare costs accelerated, pensions disappeared, and the safety net of Social Security became less certain. This is a structural problem, not an individual failure problem. And recognizing that is important because it shifts the focus from blame to adaptation. If you're watching this and you're in your 50s, you still have time to adjust. Increase your savings rate aggressively. Max out catch-up contributions to retirement accounts. Eliminate debt before retirement. Optimize your Social Security strategy. Build flexibility into your retirement plan. If you're already retired and you're seeing your savings deplete faster than expected, you need to act now. Reassess your spending. Consider part-time work. Delay Social Security if you haven't claimed yet. Evaluate your housing situation. The longer you wait to make adjustments, the more severe those adjustments will need to be. The 1 in 4 number is going to get worse before it gets better. The policy changes needed to stabilize Social Security and Medicare are politically difficult and unlikely to happen until the crisis becomes undeniable. The market returns needed to bail out underfunded retirement portfolios are unlikely in an environment of elevated valuations and slowing economic growth. And the healthcare cost trajectory is not reversing. This means the burden of solving this problem falls on individuals and households, which is why understanding the mechanics of retirement sustainability is so critical. You cannot rely on the system to protect you. You have to understand how the system actually works and position yourself accordingly. That's not cynicism, that's realism. And realism, combined with clear-headed planning and disciplined execution, is what separates those who run short from those who build sustainable retirement security.